Experts have been pointing out that the COVID issue last year was going to decimate corporate media. So of course, CEOs of these companies that represent things like movie theaters all the way to concert venues said that they were going to tighten their belts and help out a little bit, take some cuts to salaries to help out. So the question now becomes, what is the grade on that? What is the results? Have they really been doing it? And for how long did they do it? Well, Variety has some of these answers. Over at Variety, they pointed out Comcast said last year that CEO Brian Roberts and other executives would donate their entire salaries to COVID relief efforts from April 20 through the 2020 through the duration of this situation, quote unquote. The duration of this situation. I'm not sure they knew how long that situation would go, but they started keeping their salaries after just 6 months. They go on to say some people took salary cuts, but it hasn't affected overall compensation. Most of what they lost in salary will be made up for in long-term incentives, the way you can always see, the way most folks, as they point out, people who work for these corporations, I'm not sure if they have long-term incentives with a value within the company to pay for any cuts that they made last year, or maybe loss of job that they had last year. Even with the cuts, so the media industry still screws over many of its employees. A typical employee in this industry would have to work 306 years to match what the CEOs averaged in 2020 alone, just last year alone, based on each company's calculation of median worker pay. That's an improvement from 416 years in 2019 that someone would have to work, down to 306 years. Nice. They'd have to work, but remains it's a far higher ratio than you would see at most top US corporations. So before we get some of the details of what these corporations and these CEOs made versus what their employees make, jump in, Cenk. Let me know what you think about what's going on here.
So look, I think there's an interesting story because it's not black and white issue. So if you're a company that's making a ton of money and you want to pay your CEO a lot because you think it did incredible work in building up your company. In fact, I have a perfect example of that. Hey, it's a free country, God bless, okay? So I think the good example of that is Netflix. So they pay their executives a tremendous amount of money. Reed Hastings, co-CEO, gets $43 million. Ted Sarandos, also co-CEO, gets $39 million, okay? But look at their average employee compensation. $219,000, holy cow. Must be good to work at Netflix. So, so at least they're paying their employees a lot of money. Now, of course, little apples and oranges here, don't get me wrong. If you're at Disney, the average employee salary is way lower. Why? Because they got the parks. And they've got a lot of other things that's part of their network, whereas Netflix has a lot of executives that work there and they don't have parks and public facing things. So I understand it's a little apples and oranges. But also, shareholder return last year was positive 67%. So you make a ton of money for the company, which they did, and Sarandos and Hastings have been there from the beginning pretty much, and they built that company in essence. So you want a reward for outstanding performance and you're paying your workers? Great. There's nothing wrong with being rich. There's nothing wrong with being successful. That's fantastic. On the other hand, let's take AT&T as an example. Now, here's the part that drives me crazy. So you've got executives making, Randall Stephenson, he's the executive chairman, he makes $29 million. John Stankey is the CEO president, and he's making $21 million. Now look at that, they went down -9, -6.5. So because of COVID, et cetera, it's not like they didn't feel the pain, they lost 6.5% of a $21 million salary. Okay, now the average employee there is making $89,000. Okay, it's respectable. I don't know all the different layers and how many are executives and how many are outward facing, so it's hard to tell if that's a good number or not. But the point I wanted to make is shareholder return last year, -22%. Now wait, we hear all the time, these are the smartest, the brightest, the greatest, right? And these CEOs need to be paid $20 to $40 million because they're making so much money for their shareholders. Okay, if you're making money for the shareholders and your employees are getting paid, great, that's awesome, right? But wait, if you lost 22%, why are you still getting the $29 million and the $21 million? Because it's rigged, because they pick people that are friendly to them to put on the board. The board says, yeah, of course you should get $20 to $40 million, whether we make money or we lose money, and that's how this game is played. Roll.
Now, and I want to show you this here. They talk about media. Anthony, show this, please. So David Zaslav, who was with Discovery, made 37.7 million last year. The previous year made 45.8 million. Okay, it was down, but here's what's interesting, and this is the key. You can come back now. This is the issue. What is the ratio? Because the public companies now must disclose the ratio. It's 565 to 1. In terms of the ratio from what he makes and the median employee. 565 to 1. Well, the reality is this, dude, the reason you can make $37 or $50 million is because of those employees. 100%. And so when Donald Trump and the Republicans pushed forward that tax cut, what were the lies being told? Oh, they're going to reinvest that. What was the lie that they sold to America? They're going to reinvest that money in wages. They're going to reinvest that into rebuilding their infrastructure. And you know what the CEO said before it passed? No, we not. We're gonna use that money for stock buyback. And so for every one of these Republicans and the Democrats who supported it, who's running around talking about, oh yeah, it was gonna spur the economy. No, they told everybody what they were gonna do with it. We're going to use the money to buy back stock to enrich the shareholders. They don't care again about those workers. They cut to increase productivity so they can make more. I know during COVID, when I had to cut 20% of my staff, I cut my salary 75%. See, that's what leaders are. That's what leaders do. And trust me, I sure as hell ain't making $50 million a year.
And see, and also the way it works is they know that many of these employees, there's people around the world, not even necessarily their own employees, but employees in general are too busy worrying about, okay, how am I gonna move this money around to survive? Too much to actually continue on knowing what's going on above them, what's going on with CEO pay, what's going on with all these other things, because who has the time to track and calculate that and try to do something to push the needle in any kind of fair, equitable way for these employees? So it generates itself. It goes back within itself, because in order for the people who are working for you, who make your business, to stop providing that for you while you screw them over, they need to not have the time to really invest in doing something about it. So it all works out just to keep this same process going within itself. And Roland, you talked about how last year they said, oh, we're gonna reinvest that money back into the salaries and in the business and infrastructure, whatever else they said. You could have had that exact same line in 1990, because they've been saying it since forever. That, oh, hurry up, give us the money, and we're gonna reinvest it into you because you can only get it from us. It's like they're godlike figures or something. You can't do anything until you give it to us and we pay it back to you. Why is that the situation? But we continue to buy it, quote unquote, buying this line of garbage about how they are the overseers of whether or not anyone else can survive in the country.
Yeah, and look, guys, sometimes you gotta make cuts, and COVID was a tough time. So again, I'll use Disney as an example there. You got theme parks, people aren't going to theme parks. We get it, right? So you can't say, oh, they should never let go of anybody. It's sometimes not realistic. But when you tell us you're gonna not get paid through the duration, COVID is the worst in November, December, January, etc., and you start paying yourself again in September, right? And then you tell us, no, I took a 6% pay cut, I'm still making $21 million. Okay, well, it's a different situation. Now, to give you just a sense of how extreme it is, it's similar to the numbers that Roland gave you. The average employee at these companies that we're talking about, these media companies we're talking about, in order to make this, how many years do they have to work to make the same amount as the CEO makes in 1 year? They have to work 306 years to make the same amount. But that's actually down. From 2019, the year before, they had to work 416 years to make the same amount of money as the CEO makes in 1 year, right? And so if you're a company that has trouble in making your margins and being sustainable, that's one thing, okay? If you're a mega corporation like Amazon, Comcast, etc., and you brag on your shareholder calls, which by the way, we go on, our managing editor, Jonathan Larson, is great at that. He gets on the calls and he hears them bragging, and then he'll write stories about it. Oh, we had a great year, we had a spectacular year, our margins were awesome. And then they go on TV and go, oh my God, you got to give all the money to us so we can trickle it on you, right? But we had to get rid of these people and we couldn't pay them wages and don't do $15 minimum wage. Oh, poor us. No, we see your margins. If you have a super healthy, mature, giant corporation and you're not even willing to pay your employees, that's the heart of the issue. We don't have a problem with people doing great business. We don't have a problem with people making a profit or getting a big salary. But you have to actually perform and you have to actually take care of your employees as well when you do.
But Jay, this is also why when you actually study, when you actually look at the analysis and the stories that are being done on these network broadcasts, then people now have to understand why certain things are not talked about. Why is it that you don't have real conversations about public education on these networks? Because the people who literally are on the air, kids don't go to public school. They go to private school. Why is it that you don't have real conversations about the impact of bankruptcy and healthcare? Because they're not having those problems. I remember when I was at CNN in 2009 and we were in the middle of this whole healthcare discussion, President Obama was trying to push it through. And I remember going to one of the executives at CNN saying, and I was asked, what's your assessment of our healthcare coverage? I said, it's trash. They said, why? I said, because you're talking process. The person said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, in 2000, my appendix ruptured covering the Democratic National Convention. I didn't have any health insurance. I said, while I was there, my car got repossessed from the airport because I actually couldn't afford to pay the miles on it and the lease was up. It happened while I was in the hospital. I said, I battled them for 4 years. I said almost $100,000 in bills. I said eventually I had to file for bankruptcy because they tried to foreclose on my home. I said, so let me ask you a question. Who do you think could have a real discussion about healthcare on the air? Me or somebody who doesn't have that story? Yeah. See, that's also part of the issue. That's why we don't have real conversations on these major networks, because you're not dealing with people who truly can talk about their lives and how these issues have affected them and convey that to the audience.
Yeah, I mean, it's a murderer's row of terrible media, honestly. I mean, you got the mainstream media, who these guys are the CEOs of. They have the problem that Roland just outlined. And the right-wing media, Rush Limbaugh had an emergency operation and when he was vacationing in Hawaii back in the day. And he came back on his air in right-wing media and said, well, it was no big deal. I don't know why anybody has insurance. It only cost me the amount of a small car. That's all. That's all. Oh, right. I see.
Right.
Okay, because we all got that lying around just in case something goes wrong. And that's how callous a lot of these folks are. That's just the reality. Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, Jayar. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.